Welcome to the newest addition to the Rave Waves lineup, the Let's Talk About It show, brought to you by the Rave Reviews Book Club. I'm Rox Berkey with my co-host Guy Worthy. Hi, Guy.
Hi, Rox. Let's talk about it. It's the newest Rave Waves production where we take on the controversial topics of the day and relate those topics to books that can be found in our RRBC catalog, written by our awesome RRBC members. And this way we can open a much needed dialogue platform while also promoting books in the RRBC catalog.
So RRBC is best known for only promoting our own members via Rave Waves. But Nani created Let's Talk About It to be a different kind of show. We'll open up this forum to outside guests who can enlighten us as well as educate us on some topics of today. For example, today's guest is the founder of a fairly new organization some of you may have already heard of, the 15 White Coats. This organization is so interesting that since last year, they have been profiled on some of the top media outlets around the world. Good Morning America, CNN, NBC, News, People Magazine, The Kelly Clarkson Show, and Canada and outlets in the UK have covered their story. Yes, please help me welcome Dr. R.J. Ledet. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ledet.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you all.
That's great. We're really happy to have you here. And audience, we will be opening the floor for questions and comments for today's guest throughout the show. But your mics basically will stay muted until then. And if you'd like to be acknowledged, those you can wave your hand, and you can do that on the participants list too. You can wave your hand electronically to get our attention. And you can also use the chat. So there's a chat window, and use that for any questions or comments that pop up. And Rox and I, your professional hosts, will in fact relay your questions to Dr. Ledet. So Rox, I think we're ready to start talking.
I do too. Thanks, Guy. So Dr. Ledet, how did the 15 White Coats come to be? And by the way, we love that name.
Thank you so much. We do too. That's why we swear by the 15 White Coats. So the 15 White Coats was born out of actually a conversation that I had with my 8-year-old daughter at the time, who's now 9. So I went to a historically Black college and university in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. For all of you all who may not be familiar with my own personal story, that's kind of been like on every news station around the world lately. I was like really, really, really poor, went to the military, and then I went to college. And while I was in college, I was also a security guard at a hospital. And then I went to go get a PhD in molecular oncology and tumor immunology at NYU School of Medicine. And now I'm finishing up my MD and my MBA at Tulane University in New Orleans. And so this all happened while I was in New Orleans. But essentially, one of my best friends who was also getting his PhD in the same lab came down to visit me in New Orleans. And we both went to HBCU. So Black history is like a really important thing in our lives. So we decided to take a trip down to the Whitney Plantation. The Whitney Plantation is very different from other plantations in that it doesn't highlight the life of the owners of the plantation. It highlights the lives of the people who were captured and terrorized and enslaved. So we figured it'd be a good place for us to learn from. I also strong on my 8-year-old daughter at the time to come along with us. She's a tennis star here in the U.S. And she just figured she could go to tennis that day, but we figured she needed this history lesson. So she came along and begrudgingly she did what 8-year-olds do, which is just walk around moping. And then we left. So it's a 45-minute ride out, and then it's 45 minutes back. It's like 45 minutes outside of New Orleans. And as we left, we were maybe 15 minutes down the road, headed back to New Orleans. And my daughter just shouted out of the blue, like, "Hey, Dad." And I was like, "What's up?" And she was like, "You know, I finally understand why being a Black doctor in America is such a big deal." And I was like, "I've been trying to tell you this forever." But tell me why. Tell me why you've come to such an epiphany. And she said, "Well, just think about it. We just left a plantation." And she was like, Black people on that plantation and every other plantation, they couldn't be doctors or engineers or lawyers or doctors or scientists or book writers. They had to be cattle and property. She's like, just think about how far we've come in spite of systems that were in place to make sure that that was the case. So after I kind of gathered myself from an 8-year-old giving me such an epiphany, you know, I turned over to my friend and I was like, "Yo, I got an idea." I was like, "I think I'm gonna get together some other African-American medical students and we're gonna illustrate to the world how far we've come. In spite of these systems that were put in place to make sure that we never don these white coats." So we did that. We scheduled it. We intended to go out there in all Black in our white coats, and we took those photos not for everyone else. Actually, that was the initial idea. Was like, we're gonna take this for everyone else. But then we took it for ourselves because a lot of people don't know how daunting medical school is. It's like one of the most grueling experiences you'll ever have to go through. And I can say that because I'm like a 9.5-year Navy veteran, and I've deployed enough to know this is pretty daunting. This is a pretty daunting process in comparison to deployments.
Hey, could I break in and ask who else was there and how that part happened? You know, how did it end up being 15?
Yeah, so it was actually supposed to be 22. It was supposed to be 22. Imagine the 22 white coats when they had the same ring, right? So I sent out an email to everyone in the school, in the medical school, no matter what class they were in, because medical school is 4 years in the US. And so I wrote this email asking people, I was like, "Listen, I think we're about to take an iconic photo. This photo will probably never be forgotten. And I think you all should come out here and so we can help people understand how far we've come." And people, you know, elected to say like, "Well, we don't really need this for everyone else. We kind of need this for ourselves." It's like a remembrance of, you know, just how, like, why it's so important for us to make it all the way through. So people signed up, but some people didn't show up, which is kind of how things commonly work in general. But, you know, I'm one of those people who says, like, you know, God knows all. So 15 was the number. And that's how 15 people ended up showing up. And it was 14 and us. But actually, my kids were there. My wife was there. And the guy who took the photos, none of these photos are professional, by the way. They were all taken on an iPhone camera.
Oh, wow.
Just like on a regular camera, like just literally phone photos. No one knows that. People are always like, "What professional took these photos?" I'm like, iPhone took these photos. So yeah, that's how it ended up being 15. And the guy who took those photos is someone that I've been mentoring since his freshman year in college to become a doctor. And so I took him on that journey because every time I get an opportunity to expose him to what it takes to become a physician, he needs to see what that journey is like before he gets there so that he can continue to dream and imagine and work hard enough to get there. So having the luxury to put him in that environment and help him to interact with other medical students keeps him dreaming and thinking it's possible, but also helps him to understand what's necessary in order to, you know, to get the job done. So that's the long story short behind how the photo came to be. Now the company is a whole different animal. I'm an MD student, but I'm also an MBA student. And so business is kind of this thing that I've always been interested in. And when I saw the media attention we were getting, I kind of turned to you know, the people in the group who were kind of interested in this and said, we need to capitalize on this, and we need to form a company. We need to copyright these photos, and we need to trademark a lot of the slogans that we're saying in these interviews with like People Magazine and CNN with Brooke Baldwin and BBC and all these other people, because one, at some point, somebody's going to ask us to write a book, which is true. Multiple people have access to write a book on us. And then people are going to write a movie. People are going to make a movie, right? So that's true. People are wanting to make a movie. And actually the filmmaker is from Canada. And then, and then, you know, at the other end of this, right, we can take these photos and we can do two things. We can sell them to the public. So anyone can have this in their house, right? As sort of like a piece of history. But then we can take 100% of everything that we get, because we'll be physicians soon. So I don't think our salary will be a problem. We don't need to take any of this money for ourselves. We could take 100% of what we get, and then we could utilize it to put these photos into schools. Because how often is there a representation of an African-American physician as opposed to an African-American athlete in a classroom? So it's hard for a kid to imagine becoming a physician if they never see a physician who looks like them. Right? Just like it's hard to become an astronaut if you've never seen an astronaut who looks like you, behaves like you, thinks like you, or any of that. You just don't think it's possible. So
Right.
We wanted to dispel that. So that's how we ended up here.
And was going, so the picture went viral, and I was thinking that you just now suspected that it might.
No, not that it might, that it will.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I told him, I was like, this is good. I wish I could share my screen and show you all the original email. It literally said, this is an iconic photo. And the reason why was because it didn't take it was a no-brainer. It's like, if you think about it, right? Like, how did you capture over 400 years of history in one photo? That's like one of the hardest things to ever happen. We had a conversation with Time Magazine at one time, and they were like, how? Like they're like, rarely, it's hard to find like photos that capture that much history in one photo.
Yep.
You know, and each of those photos represents, so if you notice, there are 4 different photos. There's this photo that we call standing.
Yep.
It's literally us just standing up still, right? And it's kind of like us announcing that we're arriving. And then there's this photo called strong, where we're kind of like resistant to systems that are in place, you know, to ensure that things don't go the way that they probably should. And then there's this photo called strong, where we're on the house, which is essentially our illustration of, we are inside of the hospital. We aren't just on the outside telling you that we're coming. We're inside, and we have this still face, like we're in here for business. And then finally, there's this photo where we're smiling, like we've done our job and now we can be comfortable in this environment. And so it captures the, sort of like the sequence of like how we went from, oh, we arrived, to we ain't taking any of your shit, to we're here and we're about business, to hey, we're here, let's have a good time, right? So that's the way it needs to be in order for there to be systemic change, is we have to go through all those hoops. And that's literally the same course that we go through with going through medicine. People don't know that because generally people never experience it. Only less than 1% of people in the world become physicians.
Right.
And then in terms of minority physicians, it's like less than 0.01%. So how many people are you going to get together to have this conversation and then tell you their experience? And they can all tell you the same thing.
So have you found, Dr. Ledet, that going viral was a blessing or a curse? And are there some top irritants about everyone knowing who you are now? Or is it all good?
I try not to look at too many things in life as binary, as good or bad.
Okay.
I look at a lot of things on a spectrum. And in my case for this, I think it's relatively positive.
Good.
I think it's relatively positive for me. I think it's relatively positive for the other 15 white coats. I think it's relatively positive for Tulane, NYU, Southern University, but I think it's relatively unsettling for my family. Because now, right, so the issue is that in December, the 15 white coats came out. And then in June, my personal life story ended up on the cover of Vogue. So it's like, so now it's not only the 15 white coats, it's like now it's like the 15 white coats are still blowing up. Like, yeah, we got like TV appearances weekly. And then my own personal life is blowing up. So it's relatively good. But I think it's also relatively unsettling. And things like we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So things can be great and kind of bad at the same time. You know, so you got to balance it out. And I think what I've learned is that when I do get time to be at home, I like tell my manager, like, I need for you to take all the text and all the calls and all the emails and everything.
Family first. So
Yeah.
we're going to take a second. We're going to look at the gallery, which is filling up with comments and questions. And I want to make sure that you hear some of these, the audience hears some of these, and we ask some of these. So I'm going to start with one quick one that Yvette actually put into the window. And I was saying at the same time, thank you for your service. We appreciate that a lot, that you would go into the military and support your country. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Is there one in there you want to bring up? There's so many good ones in here.
Mm-hmm.
While he's looking, lots of comments on the fantastic photo. Everybody likes it. While we're talking, they're going all over the internet. We had Yvette as well go look up the number 15. It's kind of how she rolls. And the number 15 breaks down to 4, which is a great positive number. So choosing 15, as you said, kind of the way it was meant to be, it's a positive thing. Guy?
Yeah, most of the comments are actually comments, and they're uniformly positive comments. We're super glad to have you here. I'd like to delve in a little bit to some of the nitty gritty here, because the goal is the focus, at least for us. So in preamble, let me just affirm that everybody, so regardless of gender or skin color or whatever, everybody has the same palette of talents, passions, abilities, creativity, imagination, perseverance. So in an unbiased society, the proportion of folks based on ethnicity and profession X, whatever that is, should mirror the national average. In medicine, this is not true. Dr. Ledet, can you articulate a barrier or 2 or 3 or 4 that Black students will encounter on their journey to becoming a medical doctor?
Sure. So I always do this because I think it's interesting to get people's viewpoints. So if you know the answer, don't answer. But if you do know the answer, use the chat box and tell me, how much do you think it cost to apply to medical school? I didn't say pay for medical school. I said apply. And we'll see how close you all get.
35,000 is coming. 5,000 is coming up. We get close, just,
Yeah, I think it's in between Linnea Tanner
9,000.
and Shirley Slaughter.
10,000 is coming up.
It's in between $5,000 and $10,000.
Okay.
It costs between $5,000 and $10,000 just to apply.
All right.
So let's take a step back and let's think about this.
Okay.
You get a kid from Middle Georgia, family income, $25,000. 4 kids at home. How in the hell are they supposed to come up with $5,000 after they go through college? Where are they gonna get that from? Where are they gonna get that from? Like where? Mind you, you got a kid, right? So the median income in the U.S. is 34,000, right? And that's because there are some people who make like an astronomical amount of money in order to skew it up. But the reality of it is that like maybe closer to like 21, 22. So, right, so you think about this and then you take into so just college is a struggle. So then you take someone who, if you take into account the historical economic background for minorities in America, right, the average savings for minorities in America is less than $5,000. So you're going to tell me that if you were to take the average family, they take 100% of their savings and give it to their child so they can maybe get into medical school? It's like less than 10% of everybody who applies to medical school gets in. So who's going to place a $5,000 bet? No one. So that's the first economic barrier. Here's the second economic barrier. So if you all see me, so on average linear, I think you need to apply to like 20. So that's on average about a $2,500 to $3,000 application, on top of an exam that you have to pay for that costs about $400 and some dollars, on top of the preparation, which costs another $1,000 or $2,000 to prepare. And then traveling to each interview, which we don't have to do right now, thank God, because of COVID. But when COVID kind of subsides and people have to start flying again, you got to pay for a flight to sometimes remote places, like let's say, for instance, New York City to Shreveport, Louisiana, right? That's a $700 flight round trip. And then you got to pay for a hotel. And then you got to have a dry clean suit. And then you got to have an Uber to get you from the airport from your home to the airport, from the airport to your hotel, from the hotel to the interview, back to the hotel, and then back to the airport, right? So that's the economic piece. But I don't think economics is the biggest barrier. I don't. I think the biggest barrier is cultural competency. Here's why I say that. So if you all see me and I didn't have on this pristine white coat or these scrubs, and you saw me walking around, normally no one would even imagine that I'm a scientist, let alone a physician scientist. Short story, I was in Walmart one time with my ID hanging from my neck. Lady says, "Oh, you're so big. What do you do?" I was like, I'm a scientist and I'll be a physician scientist. And she says, "You're right. You're really a football player."
Oh, no.
And that like regularly happens. I mean, it's even crazier when you're in the hospital and you have an ID on. I don't know where my ID is. That says like doctor under the bottom of it. And they still walk up to you and say, "Can you go get me some trash bags?" Or like, "Can you go change this patient?" It's like, what? Like, no, like, hold on. Like, hold on, what are we doing? So this cultural competency piece is so important because, right, like, so my hair creates a barrier to you understanding my capabilities. My beard creates a visual, like, hurdle for you to understand my cognitive capabilities. The twang in my voice becomes a barrier to you understanding my cognitive capabilities, even if my scores say something different. My scores can be out the roof. I can tell you, like, I'm a 9.5-year Navy veteran. I'm a Howard Hughes Medical Institute recognized scientist, and Ford Foundation, and the National Institutes of Health, and the National Cancer Institute, and Merck Pharmaceuticals, and all the, you could read, if you read my CV commonly, I've done this with my friends. I've given them a CV and told them, "Who do you think this person is?" They're like, "Oh, it's probably a white guy from New York." And I'm like, "Nah, that's me." I'm like, "That's me." So there's this cultural competency piece that we really got to talk about. That's like really hard to hurt. It's like a really hard hurdle because let's be honest. There are like so many forms of media that reinforce ideas that aren't necessarily true. But then those ideas shape the way you view a person when you're getting ready to allow them to come into your profession. But the problem is that the backdrop that you have in the back of your mind is what is this profession supposed to look like? If everyone were to close their eyes and imagine what does their physician generally look like, they're not going to look like me. And that's like a part of it. Like, we don't like to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. And I don't think it means that people are racist. I think it means that people have to think harder. That doesn't mean that people are racist. It just means that they have to do the work of thinking harder, of recognizing, man, I may have some biases in place that allow me to make certain assumptions, but those assumptions are very baseless. Right? Like I've done this before where I've assumed that the white guy with the gray hair who walks into the room is important. Only to find out that, like, he waiting on me to tell him what to do. So it's kind of like, it's a thing that we all need to do. It's not just a thing that only, only the minorities need to do, or only the people in power need to do. No. We all have a lot of biases. And if everyone worked really hard on identifying what those biases are, acknowledging them, and not feeling guilty about it, but understanding that it's a flaw, right? It's like, you don't need to feel guilty about obesity, but you do need to recognize that it's something that needs to be addressed. You don't have to feel guilty about it to the point to where it becomes like a cognitive barrier, but you do need to address it if you don't want to have cardiomyopathies or end-stage renal disease or a whole bunch of other things somewhere down the line. And so, you don't have to feel guilty about having someone else come through and have a whole bunch of edits on your book, but you do need to address those edits, right? It doesn't make your book terrible. It just means that it needs some work. Telling someone that they need to recognize their biases and then take those into account when they initiate an evaluation for whether or not someone is good enough to become a physician or a lawyer or a dentist or a janitor or anything, means that you have enough internal evaluative capacity to genuinely evaluate the person for their qualities that are necessary for the job they're asking for. The job of a physician is someone who's a caretaker. It's someone who understands the nuances of a patient's socioeconomic state, their health barriers, their disease progress, like having a base knowledge of, what the disease process is for end-stage renal disease or whatever they have. That's what's necessary. You don't have to look a certain way. You could walk in there in jeans. The most brilliant scientist I've ever met only wore like loud colored jeans. And he was a Nobel laureate. It's like, it had nothing to do with what he was wearing.
Hey, could we talk about imagery right now? Because this is one of the thrusts of 15 white coats, right? Is to help all right, let me digress just a little bit. I'm a physicist, and they've been studying this, and they've basically got two things going on, and one is the sense of belonging, like you were saying, that a young person needs to visualize themselves in that profession.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the things the 15 White Coats is up to, but you tell me.
Yeah, so I think this idea of cultural imagery is like this two-way street. So we want to put this photo in the classrooms all over the country, right? Why would we do that? Why don't we just pick the Black neighborhoods or the Hispanic neighborhoods or the minority neighborhoods and just put the photo there so that they can dream? Well, what's the issue if they're the only ones dreaming about it? Then the other kids still don't have the visual that those kids that are dreaming, right, can be that. So they need to have that memory in the back of their mind that, like, oh no, this is normal. It's like normal for me to go and see my pediatrician and for my pediatrician not to look like me. And I think that's like a huge piece of like why we're so keen on cultural imagery, is that we need for all the kids to imagine that the doctor doesn't need to look like them, or it can look like them. So for the kids who rarely see a doctor who looks like them, they're like, nah, like, look, I remember this photo. And it's not just this photo. Like, we got other photos that are coming out soon that'll probably go viral again. And then there's this other piece, which is cultural literacy. So, and this will probably resonate with a lot of you all. So think about this. I'm a kid who grows up in inner city Cincinnati, and I read a book like Gone with the Wind. Do you know how far I have to stretch to have a relativity to Gone with the Wind? Which is a story essentially about just privileged women sitting on her porch crying about the issues she has with life. But she's so privileged. She's literally got like the world at her like beck and call. Like, what kid in inner city Cincinnati is experiencing that? Except for the ones who are like in the skyscrapers in the middle of the city. They're the only ones who can relate. So those other kids can sometimes foster a disinterest for reading. We all know that reading is one of the like largest components to long-term competency, right? So you want a child to be great in mathematics. They need to be able to read well. You want a child to be great at astrophysics. They need to be able to read well. You want a child to be great at poetry. They obviously need to be able to read well. You want a child to be a musician. They need to be able to read well. But how do you read books that don't interest you? And like, how do you gain an interest in reading if none of the books match your life? Like, they don't match any experience you've ever had. There's this book called Cornrows by Camille Yarborough. This book, Cornrows, tells the history of cornrows. So a lot of people don't even know the history of cornrows. Cornrows is like this African hairstyle that's been around for like thousands of years. And so one day my daughter asked me, like, Dad, where did this hairstyle come from? And so I knew about this book because Nas talked about it in one of his songs, and I bought it for her. And then we sat down and we read it. And my daughter, my 9-year-old daughter, has read that book to my younger 2-year-old daughter at least 100 times. Because that book relates to her. Like, she can see herself in the book. And you all are writers, so you know how often you need for the reader to see themselves in the book. That's the only way you're going to capture them to go deeper than just the words on the page, which is the goal of every author, is to get the reader to go deeper than the words on the page. So if we really, really, really take this out, it's like, you want kids to be smarter. You got to give them books that at least in some way are relatable to their experiences in the world, right? Like, so like Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote this book called Between the World and Me. Toni Morrison wrote this book called The Bluest Eye, right? So The Bluest Eye, I don't know if you all know the story behind The Bluest Eye. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison is a book about this young Black girl who said that she think God made a mistake with her life. And that's why she doesn't believe in God anymore. And her friend says, well, why? And she's like, well, I was supposed to be born with blue eyes. That's the only way the world would love me. That's like the gist of the book. So like, how many kids do you think experience that? There are like hundreds of thousands of kids that experience that. Some of the kids in these detention camps right down the street are experiencing that right now. They're like, if I didn't look like this, I wouldn't be doing these things. I wouldn't be in these situations. That's like a reality. So we need to really, really, really think about cultural imagery in terms of what kids imagine. Especially as someone who's going into psychiatry, I understand how important imagery is for cognitive and psychosocial development. And also, when you think about reading, how much reading shapes what a child perceives as their reality. So their reality oftentimes in terms of imaginative capacity and things of that nature is based on what are they reading. If they're reading a TV, which we know what the majority of TV does, they really, 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 really are missing out on an ability to have a large imaginative capacity. So that's the goal, guy.
All right. Is that, no, thank you. That's fabulous. And we'll go to the gallery in a minute, but I just want to follow up. What else? Like 15 white coats is new to me. I missed the first wave or what. So if Nani hadn't found you, I wouldn't know. But now it's fascinating me. So what else? What are your other goals?
Yeah, so some of our other goals are to take kids from marginalized communities and help them to imagine becoming physicians. So we host these Zoom meetings with like thousands of kids from inner city, like every month. They're like closed off. Like these kids are kids that we literally get physicians to sit down and talk to them about what does it take to become a physician, and like what can you do now to position yourself there. How often do you think those kids get this access, as opposed to the kids who are a little bit more well off, who get this access like nearly every day? Like my daughter realizes now that her greatest luxury is like my dad's a doctor. So like she will always have access to someone. How many doctors do you think are on my phone? At like every institution in the country. So like she has an access that like most kids won't ever have, right? And so I need to take the access that I have and kind of open it like a shell and make sure that all these other kids have it. Because if the real dream is to diversify medicine, these kids have to have access. Like part of it is, and we all know this because we're all adults, right? Is that it's not what you know, it's what? It's who you know, right? So like if these kids know me, they're probably gonna be all right. I think I got a little pull. I think some of the people in my circle have a little pull. And so it like just giving these kids access to us is free. Zoom is free because the institution pays for it, right? A lot of these kids have internet because they're like homeschool, hybrid, whatever you want to call this stuff now, right? And they have devices to get on Zoom. And then we have the resources to get them, we can pay some of these people who can come on and teach them a lesson about microbiomes. Or how often do kids from inner city get exposed to microbiome lectures? Like their parents don't know how to sign up for it on Stanford for free.
Right.
It's just like, so we're doing that. And then we're also writing a children's book right now. And we're also writing this book where each of us, there's also this book that we're writing where each of us writes our own chapter of this book. And it's a conversation between who we are now and what we should have told ourselves when we were younger. So it's kind of like this dialogue between the two of us, right? And imagine that. You have these 15 physicians having a conversation with their younger selves. And they're all Black. So they're like unicorns. The reality of it is in medicine, they're like unicorns. Because there like aren't that many. So like those conversations, some kid will be able to relate to one of those 15 conversations. It'll be priceless for those kids because it's like giving them the game for free. Because that's what they need. They need the game. They need to know the rules to the game, which we've been able to master because everybody in that photo is brilliant. They're not just like getting by. They're like amazing. So it's like priceless for them. You know what I'm saying? And they get it for free. It's just like, just give it to them. We'll pay for it. We'll just give it to them. Make it accessible for everyone. Because the adults need to learn too.
Whenever I go round and round with this, sorry, Rox, jump in if you want to. Whenever I go round and round with this the issue and how to fix a particular profession, such as medicine or, you know, some other profession, it usually cycles around to education of the people that are already sitting there, right? The people that are already in the institution.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that's they need training. They need to be sensitized to the stuff they do. They don't know they do it, right? They don't know they're excluding people.
I would argue they do.
Okay.
I mean, let's think about this, right? So I'm a scientist, so I always make this claim. Do you know how much energy and money we put towards figuring out how to sequence the human genome? Do you know how much resources we put towards sequencing the human genome? Trust me, when humans want to accomplish something, they figure it out. That's what they do. That's what humans have done since the beginning of humanity. They figured out how to solve problems when it was pertinent enough. When the issue was dire enough, then everyone pitched in. They literally got to the point where they started taking taxes out of people's paycheck in order to pay to sequence the human genome, because it was the next thing we needed to do to push medicine forward. So think about the amount of energy and time and just everything we did to make this happen. We can do the same thing in this case when it becomes important enough. When health disparities become such an issue, like COVID-19 didn't exacerbate health disparities enough. Think about that. You got cities where 80% of the people dying are minority. 80%? 8 out of every 10? How much more has to happen for someone to say, okay, all right, stop. All right, let's fix it.
And there are a lot of people working on that, I know.
Yeah, there are. There are. Not enough, but there are.
So, Dr. Ledet, I have a question that's coming from our membership director, John Fonte. He asked, it seems clear that the mission of the 15 White Coats is compatible with the goals of the current Black Lives Matter movement that has spread throughout the world. Do you expect BLM to help the cause, your cause?
That's a great question. I don't know. That's the short answer. I don't know. I would hope so, but I don't know. I think the way our leadership has sort of run this show is the people who are interested in helping us will help us. We don't intend to quit anytime soon. You got to think about it. At some point, we will have access to 15, to like some percentage of 15 physicians, you know, like some part of the giving, right? That should probably carry us to do some work. Will it like be the totality of what needs to be done? Probably not. Our goals are very grandeur. I think the things that need to be done are like to really eliminate some of these economic barriers. But we'll see. We'll see what BLM does. But in the interim, I don't know.
I'm going to check the gallery for questions, and some of the questions I see are, and I see Shirley too. Yeah, Shirley, go ahead and ask yours in a second.
I wanted to make a statement that first of all, Dr. Ledet, they have to know that you exist, and I just found out about you recently this week. So the story about your organization is just coming out there, and it has to catch up to Black Lives Matter, because I think it definitely extends right into what the Black Lives Matter movement is. Corporations are opening up doors for Blacks now. A lot of people are pledging to be there to help Blacks to come aboard and be a part of the solution. So this is not a question, it's just a statement. I just think that it's going to take time, but I think you are very much a part of that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And I see a lot of authors are asking, hey, oversimplified, but they're asking, hey, I'm a white author, can I write about Black people? We, we're going to talk about that later at a future Let's Talk About It radio show. So we will table that for right now, but we will talk about that. Dr. Ledet, it's kind of, we're closing in on an hour, so we're going to have to kind of figure out a way to circle around.
Yeah. No, I'm not short on time, so it's up to y'all.
Oh, okay, great,
Mm-hmm.
great. So keep your questions coming, y'all, and I've got one. So the thing we talked about a lot was finance, but how are we going to fix it?
So I don't think. I think we often look for fixes or repairs. I don't think it's a fix it thing, man. I think it's a. I think it requires change. I think things will remain in place for the most part. If you were to ask me, this Black Lives Matter movement is like huge right now, right? Like everybody's talking about it, right? The first time Black Lives Matter happened, maybe a little bit of people, but now like everybody's talking about it. And that's great. But I don't see anybody in power saying, you know what? Let's let somebody else be in power. That will never, ever, 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 ever happen.
I've noticed that.
So it's like, I'll throw money at it and I'll even entertain it, but I'm not giving you the power to make all the decisions, because if I do that, then you may actually make things right. Which is like a thing that, like, I think especially in America, we got a real big problem with, because it requires us to acknowledge that, like, I mean, we've probably been screwing over minorities for longer than we could possibly imagine, in like so many different ways. So my wife is in banking, right? And she like comes home and laughs all the time, and she's like, such and such didn't get this long. And I'm like, please tell me why. She's like, you already know why. And Y person came in with the exact same stats and got it. And so if you think about that, right, and you take into account redlining and like just jobs in general, and just like you're asking people to be altruistic. That's like really hard to do, because like people are naturally like selfish. So which can be good and bad. I mean, you got to take care of yourself first, right? It's like being on a plane. You got to put your own mask on before you can put a mask on for anyone else. Problem is that a lot of times people will put a mask on for themselves and then not put a mask on for anyone else, except for people that they feel like putting a mask on for. Right? Instead of saying, if everyone on a plane who had the capacity to put on a mask was sitting next to someone, I always explain it to it like this. If you're sitting on a plane, 2-seater on both sides, so 4 seats across, but 2 on each side and an aisle in the middle. Everyone on the inside has the capacity to put on a mask. Everyone on the outside is waiting on the person who can put on a mask to put their mask on. If only the even rows decide to put masks on the people next to them, and the people with the odd rows say, I'm gonna put on my mask, but I'm not putting on your mask, and I'll help out the person who's on the even row. Although the person on the even row can clearly put on the mask of the person next to them just by themselves. How many people will die? Oh, everyone who's sitting in an odd row. And so we really, really, really got to ask those people in the odd row, hey, can you just do what we asked you to do, which is like help the person next to you, whether you like them or not? Because like, you know, it's just kind of like the right thing to do. But like even the right thing to do is fluid. So, you know, I think we just need to fix it. I always make this argument for medicine. I think everyone in medicine, whether you're a CNA, environmental services, physician, administrator, or whatever, need to read this book by Harriet Washington called Medical Apartheid. There's this book called Medical Apartheid, right? Medical Apartheid is this book that outlines all of the atrocities that have helped to move medicine forward that were on the backs of Black people. Not just Tuskegee and Henrietta Lacks, which are the big ones that movies were made after, but like all the other ones. So imagine if everyone read that book. Then to some degree, they would understand why distrust is a thing. Because folklore is a thing, right? And then there are griots, and there are people in your community, like your grandmother or whoever, who was like, don't take that medicine, it's gonna kill you. Why do you think they're saying that? Why do you think they're saying that? They're not saying that because like they just imagined it. They probably seen it happen. And it just so happens that it like commonly happens in the same communities over and over and over. So they're like, you can see why they'd be a bit leery, right?
Right.
And that's just something that we got to take into account, you know? That's just my viewpoint on it.
Well, I think it's a valid point. I think there's a lot to be done, a lot of work to do, but I do think it's going to take everybody.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're 100% right. It doesn't take one group. I don't think it just takes the people who are at the top. I think it takes everyone. But I will tell you that there's something called a minority tax. So a lot of people don't know about the minority tax. But like, if you think about it, when it comes down to advocacy for minorities, who's generally doing it? Minorities. Don't you think they're tired? They've like been doing this for a long time. And they get pushback on like very simple, like take for instance, transgender people. Right? So people make this argument about bathrooms being unisex. Right? But like, let's be honest. If you go to a place where there's only one bathroom, it is unisex. It's like a thing. It's like not that hard to conceive. But like people are like, it's easy to attack marginalized communities because they're weak. Because they're small. And they've naturally been like attacked, like for a long time. So every time they speak, they're commonly speaking from a place of trauma and rarely from a place of power. And so like when you hear their stories like, oh, it's never like, wow, I really need to listen to them. They're like in a powerful position. And so it's like it's a choice that needs to be made as opposed to a mandate. And so with all of these things, like the minorities are commonly advocating for things. And it's like, you're only advocating. If we decide to do it, great. If we don't, no big deal. And so you get fatigued after years and years and years and years of asking for very simple things like diversification of the board of an institution or diversification of a publishing house or whatever. So you do that for like 20 years and eventually you're like, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm tired. And then how often are you going to get people who don't belong to those groups to advocate as much for as long, as hard as those people who are in those groups? It's like so rare. Like the person who asked about writing a book about minorities, right? And not being a minority. One, you're going to have to do a lot of homework. Because you're going to be walking on eggshells, my friend. They will critique you in a way that you have never been critiqued before. But also, right, you will probably be in an uncomfortable position because you probably never had to do that in your entire life. Not in a position where like you're putting something out there for the whole world to see. You write a book, it can end up anywhere on anybody's desk.
It's true.
And so it's like you playing with fire, and it could either start a forest fire or it could be blown out really quickly. So, you know, but I think it's a brave thing to do. There's actually someone who did it. There was a guy who was I forget what he did, but it was like a 1960s or 1970s book. He wrote his memoir where he painted himself in blackface and he moved to New Orleans. And he walked around as a black person for a few days. And then he wrote a story about it. He wrote a book about it. It's a really fascinating book. I forgot the name of the book, but I did read it.
Black Like Me.
Yeah. Black Like Me. That's exactly what it is. Black Like Me.
It was a fabulous book. I read it when it came out.
Yeah. It was like I remember I was an undergrad and I was like, this is crazy. I was like, but this is brilliant. I was like, he was really brave to do that, right? But he got firsthand experience. And like, imagine how brilliant he had to be to do that at the time he did it. When like, it was like super, like, he probably could have got killed for that. Like hung somewhere and they would have found out with the makeup on the rope.
Especially in those days, that was not a time.
Rocks. That's like a death sentence, right? It's like you asking for it.
Right.
So it's interesting, but I think to that writer who asked that question, I would say yes, because I think we need those voices. Because honestly, you can write it in a way with the nuances that I can't. There's certain ways you can communicate with people that I can't. I haven't lived your experience, just like you haven't lived my experience. There's a lot of commonality amongst people who look alike in societies. It's like a thing. Right? And so there are ways that you can write about nuances and experiences and things of that nature that I can't. And that's not a bad thing. And we can acknowledge that, but we can also grow from learning from that. And I think people are very tender and careful and very anxious about anything because they don't want to get it wrong. But I'm pretty sure as adults, we've all found out getting things wrong sometimes is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. You learned a lot from getting some things wrong. It's like a great thing to do,
Walking in other people's shoes is perhaps the most challenging thing we can consider doing.
Yeah.
Too often we don't do it well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Rox. You couldn't be more right.
I hate to be that guy, but it looks like it's time for us to wrap up. This has been a great show. Thank you so much, Dr. Ledet. Before we go, we'd like you to check out this segment's feature title. It's called Our Lady of Victory, the Saga of an African American Community by author Shirley Harris Slaughter. Hi, Shirley. And some of today's discussion, of course, ties perfectly into that. So we hope you'll snag a copy.
Absolutely.
Dr. Ledet, we want to thank you for taking the time to come here today to share your story and talk to us about the organization. When the 15 White Coats has experienced more growth and you have time to share, and you've got that book where you would like some help, we hope that you'll come back and chat with us again. We'd love to help you with that and support that. And any final words that you have for us?
No, I think y'all should just keep being great. I think this is a great group of people who've asked really fascinating questions, and their attentiveness is actually it's pretty uplifting. Because I think the part that it means a lot to me as a younger person, because I think there's like this notion out there that like older people are intimidated by younger innovation. I would argue that if you sat down with older people and explained it to them, they probably would be more supportive than even some of the younger folks. Because like they can give you the nuances to make it more successful. They've like been around long enough and have like some life experience to contribute to the ideas. And so I do appreciate you all for listening. Older is not a disrespectful term, by the way. It's a graceful term. My grandmother used to tell me there are only two things that you can do. You can either get older or you can die. She told me you can either.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ledet.
And everybody get older or die.
Yeah.
That's it, right? Like that's the only two options you have. So, and Wanda Fisher
Sooner than you could ever believe.
doesn't mean that I'm old. It does mean that you're old and you're seasoned and you're experienced. Thank you all so much.
Oh yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to get back to these
So
papers.
enlightening.
Thank you. Thank y'all. Have a
All
great
right.
evening.
Well, join us again next month, and we will tackle some other hot topic.
And remember, if you missed an episode of Rave Waves, let's talk about it. You can always listen to the archives of any of our shows directly from past Rave Wave shows tab on the RRBC site. Thanks to those of you who joined us in Rave Waves Gallery today. I'm Rox Berkey.
And I'm Guy Worthy.
Be safe and try and stay well, and remember to vote.
Yes, folks.
And
Bye-bye.
bye-bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ledet.
No problem. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye. So